She took from those in need, wed her own sibling, brushed off the September 11th tragedy as a minor detail, and for over half a decade, no individual in the Capitol possessed the courage to confront her directly until Ted Cruz grasped the gavel. By 8:45 that morning, 15 minutes ahead of the scheduled commencement, the Senate Commerce Committee chamber had reached full capacity with every gallery seat occupied. Lenses from broadcast media formed a tight line along the rear wall like a ready firing squad. The atmosphere crackled with the volatile tension typical of a courtroom awaiting a jury's decision, as everyone present sensed an impending climax and found it impossible to avert their eyes. Ilhan Omar made her entrance accompanied by an entourage consisting of 3 lawyers, a pair of media aides, and a communications manager already actively posting online, followed closely by a surge of supporters hoisting placards that demanded an end to targeting Somalis, insisted religious prejudice was not oversight, and told officials to leave Minnesota alone. Their vocalizations reverberated throughout the marble hallways until Capitol security escorted them into the viewing area with strict commands to maintain absolute silence. The representative occupied the testifier's chair, displaying the practiced calm of an official who had endured hostility from her initial day in office and had mastered wearing resistance as a protective shield. Her headscarf featured a deep midnight blue hue, her jacket was impeccably tailored, and her facial demeanor silently communicated that she had endured far worse adversaries. Positioned directly in the center of the elevated platform, the presiding Texas lawmaker rested against his premium leather seat with the restrained vigor of someone who had spent the preceding 3 days anticipating this specific confrontation, mirroring the rigorous preparation he utilized for his 9 appearances before the nation's highest judicial body, a record exceeding any current legislative peer. He wore a dark suit paired with a crimson tie, and rather than standard manila folders or a small pile of briefs resting on his desk, multiple sizable presentation boards rested face down on easels behind the panel bench, keeping their specific contents completely obscured from the audience. These visual aids were a hallmark for the senator, and Capitol insiders clearly understood that when Ted Cruz introduced presentation materials to an inquiry, a witness was guaranteed to experience a remarkably difficult session. The presiding official formally initiated the proceedings by bringing his wooden mallet down a single time. He announced that this particular session of the Senate Commerce Committee convened to scrutinize the active federal probe into systemic deception involving the Feeding Our Future initiative in Minnesota, where roughly $250 million in national taxpayer resources meant for nourishing impoverished youth during a global health crisis had been embezzled. He noted that authorities had already indicted 75 individuals, while government attorneys projected that the overall financial damage across similar initiatives could surpass the staggering sum of $9 billion. He deliberately paused, allowing that massive figure to permeate the silent chamber like a heavy rock plunging into a calm pond. He stated they had summoned Representative Ilhan Omar of Minnesota's 5th congressional sector to provide testimony about her involvement in authoring the legislation that established and broadened these initiatives, alongside her awareness of the subsequent corruption. He noted the Congresswoman had agreed to the summons and expressed formal gratitude for her willing attendance. The chairman stared directly at the witness. She returned the gaze, and neither participant broke eye contact. He then informed the representative that she was permitted to present her initial remarks. Standing up, she grasped the edges of the speaking stand and directed her words to the audience with the righteous anger of a person who had meticulously practiced every single syllable. She expressed gratitude to the chairman while asserting her intention to speak frankly, declaring that the inquiry had absolutely nothing to do with financial crimes but was solely focused on the previous administration's mission to intimidate the Somali populace living in Minnesota. Her tone escalated with practiced outrage as she claimed there were presently over 12,400 federal agents deployed in Minneapolis, a figure more than doubling the local police force, adding that they were raiding Somali enterprises, traumatizing households, and making youngsters terrified to attend classes, which constituted a military occupation rather than congressional oversight. Directing a finger toward the chairman, she urged everyone to acknowledge the reality of the situation characterizing it as a conservative lawmaker from a state plagued by its own extensive legacy of corruption, dragging the lone black Muslim female legislator to account for offenses she never committed. She declared her familiarity with this exact scenario, stating she had witnessed such tactics her entire existence, describing it as the very definition of targeted harassment, and vowed she would never succumb to intimidation. Sweeping her arm broadly across the space, she recounted arriving in the United States as a 12-year-old fleeing Somalia, detailing her 4 years surviving in a Kenyan displacement center, asserting her intimate knowledge of genuine oppression, and emphasizing she could easily distinguish between actual accountability and cheap political showmanship. She waved toward the concealed presentation materials, the media equipment, and the crowded seating area, explicitly labeling the entire proceeding as a theatrical stunt. The audience erupted instantly, with backers cheering loudly and numerous Democratic peers who attended in solidarity, clapping enthusiastically from the rear seating section. A scrolling headline on a major news network quickly stated that the Congresswoman was accusing the senator of aggressively singling out the Somali demographic. A competing channel ran a banner highlighting her defiant stance and her firsthand knowledge of true persecution. The chairman remained completely still, offering no smile or physical adjustment, completely ignoring the applause, the flashing cameras, and the chanting crowd, choosing instead to wait with the deep patience of a seasoned attorney who had learned through extensive high court litigation that remaining totally quiet following a rival's passionate argument served as the ultimate tactical advantage. Once the space finally grew silent, he shifted forward and addressed her in a flat, meticulous tone devoid of any warmth, reminding her that he controlled the panel and that her presence was requested to address systemic government fraud rather than deliver a partisan stump speech. He informed her that he intended to pose specific inquiries, demanding direct affirmative or negative replies, and warned that any failure to answer would be formally documented in the official transcript. Lifting a piece of paper, he asked if she served as a sponsor for the Meals Act during the year 2020. Her primary counsel leaned over to quietly advise her, but she dismissed his input with a wave, confidently affirming her sponsorship while expressing immense pride that her legislative effort had nourished people, prompting the chairman to sharply demand a simple yes or no regarding her sponsorship, which she then provided. He inquired whether that specific law broadened national nutritional initiatives within her home state, to which she replied that it increased children's access to sustenance amid a global emergency, leading him to repeat his demand for a binary answer, which she finally yielded. He questioned whether she possessed knowledge regarding the $250 million stolen from those exact nutritional initiatives. Her facial muscles tensed as she acknowledged her awareness of the ongoing fraud allegations currently under official review. The chairman sternly reminded the Congresswoman that the resulting convictions were established facts rather than mere accusations, pointing out that authorities had indicted 75 people, secured multiple convictions, and delivered guilty verdicts in federal court, pressing her again for a simple confirmation of her awareness. He then asked if she realized a significant portion of the indicted individuals belonged to the Somali demographic within her own legislative zone, which she quickly condemned as a deceptive and hazardous generalization meant to inflict harm, prompting him to reiterate that it was documented in federal court paperwork, demanding a direct answer. Following a tense silence, she offered a strained affirmative, causing the lawmaker to nod slowly before pivoting to his first presentation canvas, revealing it with the smooth expertise of a seasoned litigator unveiling primary evidence. The photograph was massive, exceptionally clear, and impossible to ignore, depicting the Congresswoman standing behind a catering station at the Safari Eatery in Minneapolis, smiling broadly while distributing meals to a queue of patrons. The image carried a specific date, and right beneath it sat a secondary picture showing a booking photograph of the establishment's co-proprietor, who had been convicted just 3 months prior for conspiring to commit electronic fraud linked to the massive embezzlement scheme. The chairman noted that the visual clearly captured her distributing provisions at the restaurant, adding that the venue's half-owner was recently found guilty of scamming the precise legislative initiative she had championed, allowing the stark imagery to resonate throughout the chamber. He then questioned whether the picture was captured prior to or following her realization of the criminal accusations tied to that specific business. Her legal team frantically murmured advice to one another before she leaned toward the audio receiver, explaining that she distributed provisions at numerous local gatherings and could not possibly be held responsible for tracking the criminal background of every single culinary operator within her congressional boundaries. The senator maintained a steely gaze, retorting that she had not attended an arbitrary local gathering, but rather an establishment actively scamming the legislation she backed, emphasizing that she was filmed distributing resources right as the embezzlement occurred. Extracting another paper, he announced his intention to illustrate the actual mechanics of the scam so the national public could truly grasp the magnitude of stealing $250 million intended for food assistance. He explained that specific Minnesota groups purported to feed thousands of kids daily, yet government sleuths discovered many locations provided absolutely nothing, meaning the youth were fictional, the provisions were imaginary, the billing documents were forged, and the stolen capital was transferred to foreign financial institutions to acquire high-end vehicles and fund property investments across Kenya, Turkey, and the United Arab Emirates. He displayed various evidentiary photographs showcasing a premium German automobile, a coastal residence, and numerous electronic transfer logs, noting that starving kids were meant to eat, but the cash instead secured these luxury assets. Laying the pictures down, he firmly stated that the legislation facilitating this entire disaster, which scaled these initiatives without the necessary protective measures to thwart the largest pandemic-era scam in the nation's history, proudly bore her signature. Her tone turned defensive as she countered that every single relief initiative during the health crisis suffered from corruption, explicitly noting the payroll protection program bled hundreds of billions of dollars. He immediately shot down the comparison, clarifying they were strictly analyzing her specific legislation within her unique district, where members of her community faced convictions and where she was personally documented present at the crime scene. Placing the image flat, he noted the embezzlement was merely the starting point of the narrative, suggesting they pivot to examining where the actual capital ultimately flowed. He unveiled the second visual aid, a straightforward yet utterly destructive chart dividing her financial profile, showing her 2023 wealth below $250,000 alongside academic and consumer debt on the left, while the right side displayed her 2024 wealth surging between $6 million and $30 million, bisected by a glaring red question mark asking how this occurred. The senator addressed her with the calculated pacing of a state attorney, establishing the groundwork for an already secured victory, inviting a thorough discussion regarding her private financial holdings. He retrieved a printed record, identifying it as her economic disclosure submitted to the legislative clerk covering the year 2023, which documented maximum holdings of $250,000 alongside various liabilities, including educational and credit card balances, reflecting the standard fiscal status of a working congressional representative taking home $174,000 annually. He placed it aside and grabbed the subsequent filing representing her 2024 economic disclosure submitted less than a year afterward, which indicated her total wealth had ballooned to between $6 and $30 million. Glancing upward, he reminded her of a February 2025 interview with a major business publication where she explicitly claimed she was not wealthy but rather a working mother burdened by educational loans. Holding the official form in one hand and the interview text in the other, he demanded to know which statement was accurate, pressing her to clarify if she truly possessed up to $30 million as legally sworn to the government, or if she was a struggling citizen as she portrayed to the media. Shifting uncomfortably, she explained her spouse maintained valid commercial enterprises detailed in their shared filings, which prompted the chairman to immediately pivot the inquiry toward her husband's corporate activities. He exposed a fresh presentation board displaying an array of corporate logs, financial statements, legal claims, and founding documents, pointing out her spouse co-owned a California vineyard enterprise known as EST Crew. He noted that in 2024, financial backers of that specific company initiated litigation claiming severe misconduct, asserting her husband and his corporate ally falsified the entity's economic health, utilized fraudulent agreements, and invented fake stock records. Extracting a specific legal filing, he highlighted that during the evidence-gathering phase of that dispute, the court compelled her spouse's enterprise to reveal its exact cash reserves and he challenged her to state the amount. When she remained completely silent, he held the paper aloft for the media lenses, revealing the company held exactly 5 cents in its reserves, emphasizing it was not $5,000 or even $500. Yet her official legislative filing claimed that identical entity possessed a value ranging from $1 to $5 million. He swapped that document for another, steering the focus to Rose Lake Capital, her husband's investment firm, noting the court similarly forced this entity to expose its financial holdings during legal proceedings. He paused briefly to announce the total was a mere $42, letting the pathetic sum resonate before pointing out that an enterprise holding basically nothing was documented on her sworn congressional form as being worth up to $25 million. While recently the executives and consultants associated with the firm had been stealthily erased from its digital presence. Looking straight at her, he summarized the stark contradiction, noting her husband legally testified his companies were practically bankrupt. Yet she formally assured the legislative branch those exact entities held up to $30 million in value, meaning one of those declarations constituted deliberate perjury, and he demanded to know which was the fabrication. Her primary counsel abruptly stood up to interject, attempting to defend the preparation of his client's economic records, but the chairman sharply interrupted him, asserting the congresswoman was a seated legislative member entirely capable of addressing the panel herself. The lawmaker's command cracked with undeniable authority as he ordered the lawyer to sit, which the attorney immediately did, allowing the senator to arrange a fresh stack of documents across his elevated desk. He proposed connecting several crucial pieces of information, noting that prior to their marriage, her spouse operated a political advisory agency, and her 2020 Matesites election committee funneled nearly $3 million to that exact firm for digital promotion, capital generation, and mailing services. He reiterated the staggering sum of nearly $3 million funneled to her romantic partner's enterprise right before their nuptials, prompting her to furiously condemn his phrasing as a severe distortion of reality. The senator coldly accepted the challenge to proceed methodically, laying out Federal Election Commission records across his desk resembling a deck of cards. He detailed how her election committee dispersed a reasonable $86,000 to the group in 2018, watched the sum jump past $500,000 the following year, and finally saw it skyrocket past $1.7 million during 2020, representing a massive spike in expenditures directed toward her romantic interest's business over 3 years. He allowed the financial trajectory to settle, noting she maintained a romantic bond with the man while he remained legally bound to his previous wife, who subsequently uncovered the infidelity and initiated separation proceedings. He read from her sworn divorce petition, highlighting her claim that her husband admitted to leaving her due to an illicit relationship with the congresswoman, further alleging that travel expenses covered by the political committee essentially bankrolled their romantic encounters. Staring down at the witness, he summarized the timeline, noting her election committee transferred millions to her lover, his former spouse discovered the betrayal leading to a split, the congresswoman then married him, and his practically penniless corporate entities suddenly appeared on her official government filings, boasting a $30 million valuation. Taking a deliberate pause, he informed her he had spent his entire mature existence navigating legal chambers, analyzing intricate economic fraud scenarios, and pleading cases before the highest judicial body in the land, concluding that the specific factual sequence he just outlined easily provided enough justification to launch a federal criminal probe into any ordinary American citizen. Leaning forward, he highlighted that whenever anyone dared to question her regarding these glaring discrepancies, her standard defense never varied. He let the words hang in the air, mocking her predictable reliance on accusations of racial prejudice, religious bigotry, and targeted harassment. Her facial muscles locked in rigid fury while her vocal backers in the seating area fell entirely silent, making their protest placards seem less like instruments of resistance and more like theatrical props for a rapidly failing stage production. Sensing the shifting momentum, she leaned into the audio receiver, projecting the full intensity of a politician who had forged an entire career out of weaponizing personal demographics as an impenetrable defense mechanism. She forcefully addressed the chairman, declaring she refused to sit there and endure lectures regarding economic morality from a conservative faction whose primary leader carried felony convictions, while countless members of his party exploited their positions for personal wealth over several decades. She proclaimed the singular reason for her presence in the interrogation seat was her status as a black Muslim female courageous enough to defy established political norms, framing the hearing as America's standard treatment for individuals sharing her background. Staring directly into the broadcast lenses, she confidently asserted every foreign-born citizen watching understood exactly the dynamics unfolding in that chamber, drawing approving murmurs from her Democratic colleagues and executing what was arguably the most potent maneuver in her political repertoire. This demographic armor had successfully protected her for over half a decade, consistently deflecting inquiries, muting detractors, and transforming any legitimate scrutiny into supposed proof of systemic oppression. The presiding senator refused to yield the floor, declining to offer a polite regional smile or patiently let the dramatic moment fade, proving he was not a passive aristocrat but a combative litigator ready for intellectual combat. Addressing her directly, his vocal tone dropped significantly, carrying a raw, intensely personal edge the committee chamber had never previously witnessed from him, as he proudly announced his identity as the offspring of Rafael Edward Cruz, a Cuban native who battled the Batista dictatorship at age 17, suffering imprisonment, severe beatings, and brutal torture. Pressing his palm firmly against the wooden desk, he recounted how his father escaped the island nation entirely destitute, arriving in a Texas city during 1957 without speaking a drop of English, washing dishes for mere pennies hourly while funding his own education at a major state university. He explained his father constructed a completely new existence, raised a family, and established a commercial enterprise within a republic that offered him the singular opportunity his homeland fiercely denied, which was a genuine chance to succeed. His cadence remained tight and regulated, yet it vibrated with an authentic passion no observer could dismiss as mere political theatricality, as he declared his father represented a true immigrant who legitimately earned everything he achieved without pilfering government initiatives, funneling donor cash to relatives, or pretending essentially bankrupt businesses held massive value on federal paperwork. He glared at her with a piercing intensity, sternly commanding her to stop lecturing him regarding the harassment of foreign-born citizens, considering he was directly raised by one. The chamber grew incredibly still, devoid of any background chatter, whispered conversations, or the clicking of mobile devices, while a supporter in the gallery quietly lowered her placard and a liberal aide in the rear stared awkwardly at the carpet. The lawmaker straightened his documents, abruptly locking away the raw emotion and replacing it with the chilling exactness of an attorney accustomed to constructing legal frameworks with the structural integrity of a suspension bridge, ensuring every detail bore weight without any decorative fluff. He then calmly announced his intention to scrutinize her marital background. The third visual aid featured an impeccably organized chronological chart stretching across a wide white canvas, displaying specific times, identities, and locations plotted in crisp dark typography, resembling the exact type of evidence a government attorney might submit to an investigative jury, which perfectly aligned with his extensive Supreme Court background. He informed the Congresswoman he planned to present a sequence of documented facts and requested she explicitly confirm or refute each individual point. Her legal representatives leaned closely, with one placing a cautionary hand upon her arm, which she promptly brushed away as the chairman initiated the timeline. He asked if she engaged in an Islamic matrimonial ritual with Ahmed Hirsi back in 2002, which she confirmed. He then verified she produced 2 offspring with this partner before parting ways in 2008, drawing another affirmative response. Proceeding to 2009, he asked if she entered a legally binding union recognized by the state with a man named Ahmed Noor Said Elmi, which she again confirmed. He pointed out that during this period of legal matrimony to the second man, all 3 individuals shared the exact same residential dwelling, pressing her to verify the arrangement. Following a brief pause, she described the setup as a temporary housing situation, prompting him to demand a rigid yes or no regarding the shared address, which he finally conceded. He retrieved a document identifying it as the second husband's academic registration from a British institution, highlighting it recorded his paternal figure's identity as Noor Say Elm. He immediately produced a supplementary record containing her family's asylum request to the federal government, noting it documented her own paternal figure under the exact same name. Placing the two records adjacently on his desk angled toward the broadcast equipment, he highlighted the identical family names and paternal identities, then bluntly asked if her legal spouse was actually her biological sibling. The massive room seemed to shrink as all lenses zoomed in. Journalists paused their frantic typing, and the explosive query lingered in the atmosphere like a flame hovering above combustible vapor. Her response emerged sharp, heavily rehearsed, and instantaneous, dismissing the claim as a comprehensively discredited fringe theory. But the chairman swiftly countered he was not inquiring about fringe theories but demanding a sworn binary answer before a legislative panel regarding the man's biological relationship to her, which she ultimately denied. Nodding with calculated slowness, he revealed the fourth presentation board displaying a captured image from the second husband's archived social media profile, showing a picture of her biological daughter from her initial relationship. The accompanying text penned by the man explicitly labeled the young girl as his niece. The senator pointed out that if this man were truly her marital partner, the child would legally be his stepdaughter rather than a niece, aggressively tapping the specific word on the display. He asserted the man utilized the term niece because that accurately reflected their biological connection, reinforcing the accusation of a sibling relationship. Shifting forward with an escalating tone, she argued that individuals frequently apply familial labels casually within her native culture, insisting terms like niece or nephew merely represented affectionate nicknames. The chairman coldly repeated her defense, highlighting that her lawful spouse referred to her direct offspring as a niece, a vocabulary word that universally designates a highly specific genetic link indicating the offspring of a sibling rather than a marital partner. Extracting another file, he outlined the man's timeline, noting he studied in Britain, traveled to America to wed her, secured residency privileges following the ceremony, and promptly returned to Europe once she initiated divorce proceedings. He emphasized this specific chronological sequence, where a union begins right before potential residency complications and dissolves immediately after securing legal status, perfectly mirrors the exact deceptive patterns federal agents constantly hunt for. Setting the file aside, he noted that a major British publication formally challenged her to undergo a genetic screening to permanently settle the dispute, yet she declined, just as she refused identical requests from a prominent local newspaper and numerous investigative reporters over a 6-year span. Staring directly at her, he emphasized she comprehended the legal system perfectly well, fully aware a simple genetic swab requiring mere minutes would conclusively destroy the controversy if the man was truly not her sibling, completely vindicating her reputation and terminating the alleged fringe theory forever. He allowed the point to settle, rhetorically asking why any blameless individual would continuously reject a simple procedure guaranteed to establish their complete innocence, resulting in a profound, agonizingly quiet moment of pure devastation before he smoothly transitioned to examining tax consequences. He presented redacted Internal Revenue documents pointing out that between 2009 and 2011, while lawfully wed to the second man, she submitted combined revenue filings with her first partner rather than her legally recognized spouse. He paused deliberately to ensure the judicial weight of his statement landed, explaining that submitting combined federal filings demands a sworn signature verifying a legal union with the co-signer, meaning her paperwork submitted with the first partner during those specific years constituted automatic federal fraud. Her legal team was now locked in continuous, frantic whispering, while she maintained a rigid posture, exhibiting the calculated stillness of a strategist plotting her immediate survival, just as the chairman promised the situation was about to worsen. He detailed how her state's political finance oversight board scrutinized her election accounts and discovered severe infractions, notably her usage of roughly $6,000 in donor capital to retain a family law attorney. Glancing up, he emphasized she utilized election cash to legally separate from a man suspected of being her sibling following a union potentially orchestrated solely to secure illicit residency privileges from the federal government. Placing the files down, he summarized the entire chaotic web, stating she spent donor contributions to divorce a potential sibling following a suspected immigration scam, while simultaneously submitting fraudulent federal revenue documents with a completely different partner. Interlocking his fingers, he asked if a single detail in his comprehensive summary was factually incorrect, offering her the floor to amend the official transcript. Leaning toward the microphone, she spoke in a restrained, fragile tone typical of someone hyper-aware that every syllable could trigger legal peril, claiming she had confronted these unfounded smears for years, attributing them entirely to xenophobic and anti-Islamic prejudice, and bluntly refusing to address them any further. The senator acknowledged her response with a nod, instructing the official scribe to note the representative explicitly refused to offer a factual refutation of the charges. He then reached for the subsequent visual canvas, warning that while economic deception was a serious issue, her historical commentary regarding the nation and Jewish citizens represented an entirely distinct category of concern. The fifth display starkly contrasted with its predecessors, lacking imagery, fiscal charts, or chronological lines, presenting only her exact quotations rendered in massive dark typography against a stark background, featuring precise dates and origins for every single remark. Standing up from his leather seat for the first time during the inquiry, his towering frame completely altered the spatial dynamics of the chamber, transforming the massive board into a damning wall of testimony entirely constructed from her own vocabulary. He commenced reading with an altered vocal rhythm, adopting a slower, deeply measured cadence resembling a mason meticulously setting bricks, starting with a February 2019 social media post where she characterized legislative backing for Israel by claiming it was entirely driven by $100 bills. He clarified for the viewing public that the slang term referenced high-denomination currency, emphasizing the core insinuation was that Jewish wealth actively purchased political allegiance. He noted this specific allegation was hardly novel, identifying it as the most ancient discriminatory trope in documented civilization, historically weaponized to rationalize violent purges in Eastern Europe, prominently featured in fascist propaganda, and casually broadcast by a seated member of the national legislature. She hastily interrupted to insist she had expressed regret for that specific phrasing and had repeatedly addressed it, but he immediately countered that she only offered contrition after her own partisan leadership compelled her to do so, before moving seamlessly to the subsequent quotation. He directed attention to a 2019 statement regarding pro-Israel lobbying, reading her exact words questioning the political culture that permits individuals to demand loyalty to an external nation. He explained this constituted the dual loyalty smear, an allegation insisting Jewish citizens harbor greater allegiance to a foreign state than to America, a toxic narrative historically leveraged to validate the oppression, banishment, and slaughter of Jewish populations. He reminded her this exact concept served as a foundational pillar of fascist ideology, yet she confidently deployed it directly on the legislative floor. Advancing to the next exhibit, he highlighted a June 2021 digital post where she equated the United States and Israel with radical terrorist factions, explicitly claiming all four entities possessed records of committing unimaginable horrors. Stepping away from the visual aid to lock eyes with her, he summarized her action, noting she compared the most established global democracy, the very republic that granted her refuge, provided her schooling, and elevated her to federal office, with a militant group notorious for utilizing youths as protective barriers and an extremist regime that brutally executes women simply for seeking an education. He emphasized she actively grouped her adopted homeland with barbaric syndicates known for tossing marginalized individuals off towering structures, letting the horrifying reality of her words plunge the chamber into a deathly silence. He proceeded to an April 2024 incident where she attended a major academic institution amidst massive campus demonstrations, noting that when questioned on camera about surging prejudice among the crowds, she explicitly labeled Jewish scholars as advocates for mass extermination. He slowly reiterated the horrific phrase, emphasizing that a federal lawmaker branded Jewish academics exercising their constitutional liberties on a domestic campus as supporters of genocide. Turning back to the canvas, he swept his hand across the compiled quotations, describing them as a comprehensive 6-year archive of undeniable, fully documented statements. He told the Congresswoman there is a specific vocabulary term for a consistent, multi-year pattern of rhetoric that aggressively attacks a singular demographic utilizing ancient slurs, fabricated charges, and dehumanizing phrasing, definitively labeling her conduct as bigotry. Her voice sliced through the heavy quiet with sharp defiance, rejecting the label and insisting she continuously championed human rights, but the chairman immediately pointed out her own legislative peers fiercely disagreed with her self-assessment. Extracting a new record, he reminded her that in 2023, the federal legislature, prominently featuring members of her own political faction, successfully voted to eject her from the International Relations Panel, explicitly citing her recurring discriminatory rhetoric as the primary justification. He emphasized this punishment was not an isolated conservative maneuver, noting liberal members supported the measure because her own allies found her conduct completely indefensible. Placing the file down, he announced there remained one specific quotation towering above the rest, a phrase seared into the memory of every citizen. He unveiled the ultimate presentation board, a massive 6-by-4-foot canvas entirely devoid of fiscal statistics, corporate logs, or digital screenshots, featuring instead thousands of individual names printed in tiny typography that filled every available millimeter of space, appearing from a distance as a solid gray block representing 2,977 souls. He declined to recite them, opting instead to stand silently beside the memorial display with his hand resting on its frame, forcing the entire chamber to absorb the visual weight for 15 agonizing seconds. When the absolute silence finally broke, his voice barely registered above a whisper as he recalled her March 2019 address at a fundraising gala for a prominent Islamic civil rights organization. He noted that during this specific presentation, she characterized the deadliest radical assault in the nation's history, which slaughtered nearly 3,000 innocent people, using a chillingly dismissive phrase he did not even need to read because he knew it by heart. He quoted her claim that the civil rights group formed because some individuals committed a vague action, allowing the profoundly offensive minimization to hang in the air like toxic exhaust. Turning toward the seating area, he directed the broadcast lenses toward the front row for the very first time, revealing 3 men and 2 women of mature age sporting tiny patriotic lapel pins, identifying them as surviving relatives of the victims who journeyed to the Capitol specifically for this proceeding. One woman silently held a framed portrait of a youthful emergency responder, shedding no tears and causing no disruption, choosing simply to angle the picture directly at the Congresswoman, a quietly dignified action that proved infinitely more crushing than any spoken testimony. Right beside her, an elderly gentleman in a somber suit clutched a meticulously folded national banner representing the sacred triangular presentation traditionally gifted to grieving families following military or emergency service casualties. The senator offered them a subtle nod of acknowledgement without formally introducing them or exploiting their grief, allowing their mere physical attendance to serve as overwhelming evidence. His vocal tenor shifted once again, abandoning the detached prosecutor persona to reveal something far more intimate, exposed, and ultimately far more lethal to her political survival. He recounted how his own father arrived as an exile escaping Cuba, having endured incarceration and brutality while struggling for basic liberty. He noted his father reached Texas possessing absolutely nothing, lacking funds, English fluency, or social networks, surviving entirely by scrubbing plates for meager wages. Gripping the wooden stand, he paused to explain his father harbors a fierce devotion to the nation that native-born citizens frequently struggle to comprehend, driven by his intimate knowledge of the grim alternatives he personally witnessed, survived, and still carries physical reminders of. Staring intently at her, he reminded her the Republic granted her sanctuary, extracted her from a displacement facility, and offered her a fresh existence, providing her academic opportunities before ultimately elevating her to the federal legislature, granting her a rare distinction shared by only 535 individuals among a population exceeding 330 million. His tone tightened as he condemned her inability to accurately label the slaughter of thousands, instead minimizing the catastrophe to a vague action, effectively treating hijacked aircraft destroying massive skyscrapers as a trivial bother. He criticized her for treating the emergency personnel who charged upward while civilians fled downward as a mere afterthought, while reducing the desperate souls who plummeted from the highest floors to escape the inferno to a trivial footnote. Gesturing back toward the massive list, he declared every single name belonged to a real person, and she had the audacity to describe their horrific demise as simply something. While the woman clutching the portrait maintained her stoic composure, numerous individuals surrounding her began weeping. A conservative panel member removed his spectacles to pinch the bridge of his nose, and even the congresswoman's own lawyer stared blankly at the desk with a tightly locked jaw. She remained frozen in her seat. Her vocal backers had lowered their placards, and the previously rowdy gallery was now blanketed in a crushing, absolute quiet. The chairman retreated to his leather seat, completely sealing away his personal emotions behind the clinical exactness that successfully guided him through countless high court battles, calmly announcing his intention to proceed with his concluding inquiries. He abandoned the visual aids and the paper stacks, choosing to sit with interlaced fingers, observing her with the surgical detachment of an elite litigator who fully understands the precise location of every strategic element and exactly how the confrontation will conclude. He offered to summarize the established facts for the official transcript, speaking with deliberate legal precision to ensure every spoken phrase acted as a structural block rapidly enclosing her political career. He outlined her sponsorship of the legislation that heavily expanded state nutritional initiatives, leading to the theft of $250 million, the indictment of 75 individuals, and projected total losses nearing $9 billion. He noted she was visually documented distributing provisions at a venue whose cooperator later faced convictions for scamming her exact initiative, while her personal wealth simultaneously skyrocketed from under $250,000 to potentially $30 million via corporate entities, possessing less than $50 in cash, which her husband's backers currently claim are fraudulent. He highlighted her contradictory claims of being a financially struggling mother to the media while legally reporting massive wealth to the government, alongside her election committee funneling millions to her romantic partner's firm before their marriage, which his former spouse blamed for destroying their union under oath. He summarized her lawful union to a man sharing her paternal identity, widely suspected of being her sibling, her submission of fraudulent combined revenue documents with a different partner, her illegal usage of donor funds for family law services, and her extensive catalog of discriminatory rhetoric targeting Jewish citizens that resulted in her expulsion from a major legislative panel. He concluded his summary by recalling her minimization of the September 11th slaughter, before adding one final piece of evidence regarding a recent address delivered in her native tongue to a specific ethnic crowd, which allegedly featured a vow to prioritize foreign interests over national duties using her federal authority. She sharply interrupted to claim the interpretation was entirely debunked by multiple sources as inaccurate, a point the senator conceded was debated, but he quickly pivoted to the undeniable fact that she opted to address a demographic, sharing her background in a language most citizens cannot comprehend, seemingly offering a covert pledge of loyalty to an external community. He noted that regardless of translation accuracy, a federal lawmaker appearing to pledge allegiance to a foreign populace behind closed doors generated severe concerns she consistently failed to resolve. Flattening his hands against the desk, he observed that whenever she faced inquiries regarding any of these massive controversies, she reflexively blamed racial prejudice, religious bigotry, and targeted harassment, constantly attributing her scandals to external persecution. He locked eyes with her, narrowing the massive chamber down to the intense space between their gazes, and informed her he had one ultimate query she needed to deeply consider prior to answering. The ensuing silence grew incredibly dense, later described by a journalist as mimicking the agonizing, heart-pounding moment right before a jury delivers a monumental verdict guaranteed to alter reality forever. He bluntly asked if she believed the regulations applied to her, prompting her to open her mouth without producing a sound before snapping it shut, completely ignoring her primary counsel leaning in to advise her, choosing instead to remain locked in a stare with the chairman across the 15 feet of polished desk, that suddenly felt like a massive chasm dividing two completely distinct versions of the nation. He leaned forward, adopting a tone of profound, authentic conviction rather than political theatrics, observing that from his perspective as a veteran Supreme Court litigator, she genuinely believed the laws did not bind her. He accused her of operating under the assumption that financial deception, revenue mandates, economic transparency rules, and the fundamental decency required to accurately describe a radical massacre were burdens exclusively meant for regular citizens. He charged her with transforming her demographic profile into an impenetrable shield and her legislative position into a lucrative enterprise, emphasizing the ultimate victims were not her conservative rivals or the panel members currently questioning her. He clarified the true casualties were the law-abiding Somali residents in her district currently facing unwarranted suspicion due to the massive corruption facilitated by her legislation, alongside patriotic Muslim citizens nationwide who proudly serve the Republic and feel deep humiliation regarding her rhetoric. He added the victims included genuine exiles like his father who arrived with nothing and achieved success without resorting to corruption, embezzlement, or hiding behind claims of prejudice whenever scrutinized. Straightening his posture, he formally announced the panel would forward all economic transparency violations and potential residency fraud evidence to the Justice Department, direct the revenue deception evidence to federal tax authorities, and personally petitioned the Chamber's Ethical Oversight Committee to launch a comprehensive probe into the entire ordeal. Lifting the wooden mallet, he told the Congresswoman she arrived intending to portray herself as a victim of harassment, yet the compiled documentation painted a completely different picture of an elected official who completely forgot the distinction between aiding the populace and enriching herself. He brought the mallet down with a singular echoing crack resembling a gunshot, instantly terminating the session, while she remained totally paralyzed for 3 agonizing seconds under the watchful gaze of countless recording devices. Her primary counsel gently nudged her arm, finally breaking her trance, allowing her to mechanically collect her files with steady but sluggish motions typical of a mind desperately attempting to calculate catastrophic damage. Her backers were already silently exiting the viewing area, letting their protest placards droop lifelessly like surrendered banners, completely devoid of their earlier chanting or defiant digital broadcasting, as the massive energy they brought that morning was systematically obliterated over 3 hours by an expert litigator wielding visual aids and unyielding legal precision. The critical footage capturing his final question, the agonizing silence, and his brutal monologue exploded across digital networks before she even exited the facility, shattering viewing records by hitting 17 million plays within an hour and surpassing 60 million by dusk. Major networks scrambled to cover the fallout, with conservative outlets looping the absolute demolition, print media splashing her stunned silence across front pages, and even liberal panels failing to defend her, acknowledging the massive financial discrepancies required legitimate mathematical explanations rather than partisan deflection. As she fled through a subterranean exit shielded by her legal team, avoiding the media swarm while offering a weak digital statement promising future clarity, the relentless machinery of federal consequences immediately spun to life, permanently altering the political landscape. The senator reflected privately in his quiet office on his father's enduring belief that the Republic's rules truly applied to everyone, confident the ultimate verdict delivered that day was simply the truth.